This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Welcome to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Here with Rick. We're going to talk about white tree frogs. But before we do that, just want to run a commercial for Josh's Frogs, who is the sponsor of today's podcast. We're your one-stop shop for everything you need to take care of your reptile and amphibian friends. We've got everything from the live feeders to the plants to all the other supplies like the caging and the lighting. And then we captive breed animals here on site. We want you to be successful with what you keep. So we have customer service agents available to help answer any of your questions, but we also produce a lot of content. So videos, blogs, how-to articles, that kind of stuff. We want you to be successful. So check that out, joshsfrogs.com. Without further ado, welcome Rick to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Today we're going to talk about white, but give us a rundown. What do you do here at Josh's Frogs? What's your job, and kind of rundown what's a typical week look like for you?
All right. I am a amphibian keeper in the tree frog and toads department. My primary focus is keeping the tadpoles and the first stage of frog breeding and life. My bread and butter is feeding tadpoles of every species we breed here in house, making sure their enclosures are clean, balancing all the their needs for water quality levels.
Yep.
And then when they morph, the best part of the job is getting to go into all these big tanks and just catch little frogs and move them on out into their new homes where they'll be raised up and ready for sale.
That's cool. That's cool. Now, how long have you been at Josh's Frogs?
Oh, just shy of 4 years. I think it'll be 4 years this summer.
Oh, cool. And then talk a little bit about what kind of animals you kept before you were working here at Josh's Frogs. What did you keep at home?
I grew up on a farm, so tons, all your classics when I was a kid, but as an adult, just on my own, I actually had a white tree frog.
Cool.
Leopard gecko, African fat-tailed gecko, a couple of ball pythons,
Cool.
some anoles. I've had a whole bunch of stuff.
That's cool. So tell us a little bit about white tree frogs. What are they? Give us a rundown, like what's a white tree frog, size, that kind of stuff. Tell us a little bit about white tree frogs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when they're young, they're going to come out of the water and maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And you can see behind me here, these are 3 adults. 2 of them, I believe, are female, which are a little bigger. Average, I'd say about 4 inches from snout to vent as adults, although they can get a little bigger or a little smaller. And the main thing about them, visually, is they have a very wide profile.
Yeah.
The common name is the dumpy frog, and a big part of that is just because, especially this green one right behind me, just that very wide build.
Yep.
They're indigenous to Australia and Indonesia and Papua New Guinea.
Cool.
But they're really versatile. Unfortunately, that means that they've also popped up as invasive species in Florida and New Zealand. But I don't think they've done any harm, but it's not a good thing. But they're a great beginner frog. Like I said, I've had them. That was one of my first frogs I kept. I bought 2 for my son when he got old enough to keep critters of his own.
That's cool.
I'd recommend them to anybody.
Cool. And now there's some different color pattern type stuff that happens with them. So typically it's all green with a white belly, but what are some of the other color variations and other physical characteristics that can be a little bit different on some of those whites?
Yeah. Okay. I'd say the most basic variation you're going to often see, we call snowflakes. And that's just a very common thing that some of them will develop these white spots on them, like this one has on her side. And they'll get this really cool, intricate patterning across the back. There are morphs that have blue eyes. There are morphs that get this really nice honey color.
Yep.
And then there's one that's unique, I believe, to Indonesia that It's still that basic green, but it's more of an iridescent
Oh,
coloration,
wow.
which is really cool.
Pretty.
It's subtle, but it's really neat when you see it.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. Now, talk a little bit about white tree frogs' behavior. Like when are they most active, and what does active look like for white tree frog? Like how jumping around in the cage are they?
Unless you're a night owl, you're not going to ever catch them at their most active. They are nocturnal, but they're easier to wake up than
Yep.
most nocturnal species, and they are incredibly food motivated. So again, unless you're a night owl, the time you're going to see them most active is whenever you give them food. They are fairly active hunters, but they are very uncoordinated, which kind of adds to their charm. They just launch themselves at whatever they see that's moving and try to, and they're very animated too. They'll use their hands to try and gobble up crickets or whatever you're feeding them. Outside of feeding, they do climb around on the glass and on structure. So you want to make sure if you're keeping them to give them plenty of decor.
Mhm.
Just so they have that exercise.
Yep.
And they also often will like to soak in water bowls just to keep their internal hydration levels up.
Cool, cool. You talked a little bit about feeding them crickets. What are some other things that we might feed to the white tree frogs that we've fed to them in the past?
Here in house, we've fed them dubia roaches, we've fed them mealworms, we've fed them black soldier fly larvae. Um, they in their natural habitat, they will eat nearly any insect that they can fit into their mouth, and they've even been known to eat mammals occasionally in the
Oh, wow.
wild as well. So I don't believe we've ever
Yep.
bothered to do that, but I know some keepers do feed the occasional pinky mouse as
Gotcha.
well.
Gotcha. Cool, cool. Now, talk a little bit about how we set them up, and what are some of the key things that we tell people to remember when they're setting up white tree frogs.
Oh yeah. So again, this is one of the cool things about them is they're a really beginner friendly species. But you can make it as complex or as simple as you want. Because of that, it's very versatile. So
Yep.
behind me, we have the most bare bones basic thing you could do. I just threw this together. There should be a water bowl in there. They don't live here, so nobody at home watching worry. Um, but I mean, paper towel on the ground. We want to make sure it's moist. A really key thing with keeping any frog is maintaining humidity levels. These guys are pretty easygoing. 50% humidity level is just fine. It can spike when you first mist them.
Yep.
A little bit of structure to climb on. A water bowl for them to soak in is key, but they're also a great candidate for doing a bioactive enclosure. So if you want to get fancy and put down, a bed of sphagnum moss and live plants and all that, they'll flourish in that too.
Cool, cool, cool. That's awesome. What are some of the differences between white tree frogs and some of the other tree frogs that are commonly kept in captivity? Can you give us like kind of a comparison? How are they different than some of the other tree frogs that we might work with?
Yeah. So for starters, they're one of the larger ones in the market and in the hobby, which is great because you're
Yeah,
buying a cool animal. It's in a tank. You want to display it. You want to
yeah,
see it.
yeah.
A lot of really beautiful animals like to hide, and these guys are really big, so
Yep.
it's a little tougher for them to hide. They're also very handleable as far as frogs go.
Yep.
Obviously, you know this, but
Yep.
just for the audience's benefit, frogs don't love being handled. They have
Yeah.
permeable skin and they can absorb the oils in our hands. So anyone who wants to handle them has to wash their hands first and keep
Yep.
it to a minimum. But by the metric of frogs, they're one of
Yeah.
the most handleable species. Excuse me.
Yep.
And again, they're really hardy. They survive well in the wild in a variety of biomes, and that
Mhm.
translates to the hobby, which makes them the perfect beginner pet.
Cool. 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 Talk a little bit about breeding. Like, how do we set them up to breed, and walk us through the process of from them breeding, how do we take care of the eggs and tadpoles, and how we get them out of the water?
Yeah, absolutely. That's like my favorite part of the job, honestly. Uh, so the basics is it starts out with finding the right animals. Obviously, you want to have both male and female.
Yep.
Their bellies are this really pale, translucent color.
Mm.
And when a female is gravid, you could actually look at her belly and see these dark eggs
Oh,
through
wow.
the skin. Again, it's subtle.
Yep.
It took me a minute to figure out
Yep.
how to do it, but when a female's ready to lay, you you can just see it.
Yep.
And then the males, when they're ready to reproduce, they have these pads on their thumbs called nuptial pads. And when they're in the mood, those pads turn a dark color
Hmm.
and get larger. Um, so the biggest part is just finding the willing participants. We put them in an enclosure that we have just a few inches of water in, and we simulate rainfall
Okay.
with a PVC structure that I built,
Yep.
um, and set that to a timer, and just kind of let them go. The best time to breed them is when there's natural pressure shifts in the atmosphere, so just before a rainstorm or whatnot.
Mhm.
But they're one of just like with their care, they're one of the easiest species to breed. And once we have those eggs, um, the biggest thing, making sure that the water is good quality. You want to make sure that it's dechlorinated. Make sure you've got a good pH around 7, and a little warmer than room temperature water is about where these guys flourish.
And then where are they laying the eggs? Are they laying the eggs submerged? Are they gluing them on something? Where are they usually laying the eggs?
They're laying them directly in the water. They
Cool.
float when they are first laid, but they sink pretty shortly thereafter. And then we just leave them alone until they hatch. And a clutch can be anywhere between 200 tadpoles on the smaller ends to upwards of 2,000 on the larger
Wow.
end.
That is a lot of tadpoles to take care of.
It's a full time job, but it's a
Yeah.
fun job. So
Now, you have 200 to 2,000 eggs. They lay them in the water. How much water volume are you using to take care of that many tadpoles? Is there a rule of thumb on how many tadpoles go in how many gallons of water?
So here in house, we keep our tadpoles in 40-gallon breeder tanks,
Mhm.
and it's not quite full, but it's most of the way full. I try to keep, somewhere between 100 and 150 tadpoles per tank, and I prefer lower population densities where I can manage it. Um, Anything beyond that, and they're going to start out competing each other, and the water is just going to get really gross as
Yep.
they're eating, and
Yep. What's the schedule as far as feeding and cleaning on those tadpole setups? Like how often are you feeding and how often are you having to do some type of water change?
We do water changes on them every day.
Mhm.
Well, 6 days a week.
Yeah.
No one wants to work on a Sunday, but and then feeding, we do it 2 or 3 times a day. We
Wow.
mix up our feeding with their tadpoles. They get our house brand tadpole
Yeah.
food, but then I also give them bloodworms, and boiled spinach. And honestly, they're really voracious. Just like in adulthood, they'll eat darn near anything you throw at them.
Wow, that's cool. Now, I know tadpoles can eat at different levels in the water. Are these eating stuff that's floating? Are they eating stuff that's on the ground? Are they pretty voracious and will eat things at all levels of the tank?
They are a take all comer species. If you add the food on top, they will start eating right off of the surface. If you pour in something denser like the bloodworms, they'll sink to the bottom. They'll all go down there. It's quite a sight to see the feeding frenzy start to kick up.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Now, I know sometimes when people are breeding white street frogs, they're looking for these kind of different types of morphs and different types of things. Are you seeing those at the tadpole level? Are you seeing tadpoles look a little bit different, or is it when a frog comes out that you notice, hey, this is a little bit different than some of the brothers and sisters?
The tadpoles are mostly the same. Every once in a while, we get a strange, almost albino looking one.
Uh huh.
But that's very much the exception, not the rule. Generally, any morph difference is going to be obvious once it's a froglet. And sometimes, even then, it'll take a few weeks for those more distinctive characteristics to develop.
Cool, cool. Now, talk a little bit about that. Like, give us an example, like snowflakes. Like, do you see those changing as they get older,
Oh,
or is
yeah.
it okay?
It's just like humans with freckles. I had freckles all over my face when I was a little kid, and I think I got like 3 of them. But so in their first few weeks, they can change drastically. But generally speaking, once they get to about where we try to sell them, you've got a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like. It may change somewhat, but it's fairly set.
Oh, cool, cool, cool. And I noticed like on the one behind you, he's a little bit darker. Are you seeing different shades of that green, and how much of that green changes on an individual frog as the course of a day? Like, is it that green the entire day? Does it change a little bit?
Oh, they change drastically based on mood, temperature, stress levels, a whole bunch of factors. I'm not even sure half of the
Yeah.
time. And some of them do have sort of their base color,
Yep.
but they'll fluctuate between browns, greens, somewhere in the middle, or a nice earthy tone. And I should actually specify, and I apologize, I did just kind of
Yeah.
the honey morph in particular is one of the exceptions where like really they will change more the older they get.
Really?
So yeah, sometimes it'll be a few months before you start seeing them come into their own.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, huge variety both across morphs and also individuals.
Cool. 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 Now, talk a little bit about some of the issues that people might have with whites, or some of the things you might want to keep in mind if you've never had a frog before and you're thinking about getting whites. Is there anything you should keep in mind when you're keeping that kind of frog? So different things to kind of avoid, or to make sure that you do to be successful with white tree frogs.
Yeah. So this is pretty basic stuff, but again, this is my personal recommendation for a starter frog. So the most important thing is humidity and water.
Mm.
Um, you want to make sure there's enough humidity that the frog never gets dehydrated. These guys are pretty easygoing. 50%, a wet paper towel on the floor that you change every few days. That's what we do. We change paper towel every 3 days. Just 'cause
Uh-huh.
it's a quick and easy way. But it's just striking that balance between humidity and moisture, but not letting bacteria and fungus run amok because that can be lethal for a frog.
Cool.
And then the one other mistake I see in the hobby a lot, and it's less major, but as I've mentioned a few times, they're very enthusiastic eaters, and that leads to obesity.
Mhm.
And they get this admittedly adorable fat deposit on their forehead that kind of it gives them the squish down, kind of Neanderthal looking vibe, and it's adorable. But that is a sign of obesity, and it's very easy to let your frog overfeed.
Cool. Is there any rules of thumb that you should use when feeding? Like, how do you make sure you manage that and don't overfeed the frog?
Well, here in house, we feed them 3 times a week
Okay.
when they're young, and alternating 2 times a week,
Yep.
depending for the adults, as needed based on.
Gotcha.
But the rule of thumb generally is 3 to 5 crickets for adults
Cool.
that are of appropriate size each feeding. 5 to 10 for the younger ones. Of course, they're growing; their
Yep.
metabolism is
Yep.
faster.
Yep. And then how do you determine what the size of cricket is that you should be feeding the whites?
Honestly, so for the whites and for a lot of frog species, the space between their eyes is about the size of the food item that they should be ingesting.
Cool.
There's a little wiggle room with softer bodied animals, but by and large, it's a very safe way to go.
Cool. 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 Anything else we should know about white tree frogs before we move on to a lightning round?
Ooh, I they think they're a great animal. Again, they're accessible for beginners. They're viable enough that you can do some crazy stuff. I just recommend them. I think they're great.
Cool. Cool. I love white tree frogs, and I love that a lot of times it's people's first frog, and I think it's really easy to be successful with them, and I think that's a really cool thing for our hobby. So cool. All right, we're gonna
Agreed.
do a lightning round.
Ooh.
Give me the first answer that comes off the top of your head. If you can't come up with anything, we can say pass and go on to the next question. But just
All right.
give us your first reaction off that. So, if money and space were no issue, what's your dream pet?
Ooh. I would go with a large monitor, possibly a white throat or a savannah.
Cool.
I just love big lizards.
Cool. Cool.
Always
cool.
have.
All right. Besides Josh's Frogs, what's another brand in our hobby that's producing really good products, or a breeder that's really producing some really cool animals?
Mm. I'm gonna say Fear Not Tarantulas because they
Cool.
helped me get my hands on a gift for my wife that she's very fond of.
Oh,
So
fun.
if
Cool.
you guys are listening, thank you. You made her very happy.
All right. Your favorite animal or plant in the whole entire world? What's the coolest
Ooh.
animal, coolest plant?
Can I go with an extinct one?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Parasaurolophus, best dinosaur.
All right. Tell us a little bit about what that dinosaur is for those who might not know.
All right, late Cretaceous era herbivore. It's been in the Jurassic Park movie, so I'm sure people have seen it there. It has a very long crest on its skull.
Yep.
Flat face. Presumably traveled in herds.
Oh,
It's
cool.
just one of the coolest looking animals to ever exist.
Cool. All right. When you were a young child, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your first, like, oh, this is what I want to be when I grow up?
I would probably say either a marine biologist or a paleontologist.
Oh, cool.
I was raised on Nat Geo.
Oh, cool. Cool. All right. If you had a free hour, no one's bothering you, You can do whatever you want for that hour. What are you doing? What's the unwinding activity that you do that you love to do?
I'm a dad, so getting a whole hour to myself is excellent. I don't know. Might learn a new song guitar. Maybe start a new bottle of homebrew something in my basement, or if it's after a work day, just put my feet up and play video games.
Cool.
Honestly.
Cool. All right. This is the last one and probably the hardest one. All right. You have a bunch of people listening to you. Everybody's giving you your ear. What's one piece of advice or one reminder that you would give to people?
Oh, that is a tough one. We went from like fun stuff to philosophical. There's a million things in the world for people to stress out about and worry about, but our time here is real short. I think just don't spend too much time and energy worrying about stuff you can't change, and focus on what you got going for you.
Cool. Thanks, Rick, for sharing that wisdom and teaching us a little bit about white street frogs. If you watch anything, videos that we do, either on social media, on YouTube, you'll see Rick's face on that. And then a lot of the animals that we're producing, Rick had his hand in that water with the tadpole. So his hands are all over you guys' animals. So thanks a lot, Rick, and have a great day. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.